Hello, everybody. I have got Brian with me today, and this is like a special second part episode where we're teaming back up again to talk about the release of his second book. But before we dive into the questions that I've got for you, can you give everybody a quick introduction?
Yeah, so I'm Bryan Falchuk. I'm like a 21 year, I think this year, veteran of the PNC industry. And most recently, I've really been focused on trying to help the industry evolve and move forward and embrace so many of the changes and really pressures and opportunities that we face. I run a consultancy and advisory practice called Insurance Evolution Partners. But as you mentioned, I've been putting out these books called The Future of Insurance, rather, that's all about how do we learn from the changes going on that different carriers have been through and embrace that and move forward and find a path, because this industry is super important, right? We stand by people at the worst moments of their lives, and yeah, that's a really strong purpose. So I want us to all kind of contribute to doing better and moving ahead there.
Great, thank you. And I'm excited for the release of the second book. I've been poking around in that advanced copy a little bit. But as we lead into the release of the book, can you talk a little bit about how the premise of it and how it relates to volume one of the
Yeah.
insurance or the future of insurance and kind of what to expect?
Yeah, I mean, they're definitely like, I think it's two sides of the same coin. So the first book was like, look, as an industry, name your barrier, right? We're slow. We've got legacy tech. We've got politics. We've got regulation, like all these reasons why it's hard for us to make change. And they're kind of excuses, but they're also real. Like we actually do face those things. And so the first book was case studies of 7 legacy carriers or incumbent carriers who overcame those barriers to make some meaningful progress, innovation, evolution in a specific part of their business. And I wanted to pull lessons and inspiration from that to help people move forward and say, hey, if they're doing that, they're 120 years old, they're a mutual or their staff is unionized or, whatever the barriers are, and they made change, maybe we can too. One of the things that those incumbent carriers were facing is not just a shift, a really rapid shift in customer expectations around, how we serve them, the tools we give them, and all that, but also this pressure from these startups that get a lot of attention in the insurance and insurtech media space. All these new unicorns popping up, and these guys have a clean slate, and so it must be so easy for them, and they can do all these innovative things. And maybe it feels a little unfair, right? Because they're not burdened by any of the things that we in the incumbent side are. And I come from the incumbent space. Well, the reality is like that's not necessarily true. Everyone has hurdles, everyone has complications and faces challenges. So there must be some insights on the startup side. And I said, we need to tell that part of the story too. So the second volume is 8 different case studies or case studies of 8 different startup insurers, and I use the term loosely. Some are MGAs, some are full stack carriers, but it really rounds out that story of like, what can we as an industry do to move forward, and where can we take inspiration? And kind of giving away the idea here, it doesn't matter if they're a startup or an incumbent. The lessons don't only apply to one side or the other. Across both books, the lessons apply regardless of the kind of company you're in. It ultimately becomes a choice of what you're willing to embrace and make a part of your process to move forward.
I think there is like a nice little life lesson of the grass is not always greener on the other
Yes.
side nestled in there, and that everybody has their own challenges, even if you're not acutely aware of them.
Yeah.
As you were having these discussions, I know you and I talked a little bit about some of those lessons learned, and there were some surprises in terms of some of the strengths that these insurtech companies were recognizing, at least from my perspective, was
Yeah.
a surprise. Can you share a little bit about some of those findings?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think one of the presumptions going in is these startups don't really get the complications of insurance. They don't understand the difficulties around the regulations and all that. And actually, yeah, that's true in some cases, but not everyone. And what I found in the companies that I talked to, the vast majority of them actually recognized really early on, compliance is not something to rail against or to see as an adversary. It's something that actually could be a strategic advantage if you embrace it right off the bat. And that was pretty surprising. I figured their journey would be like, we went along and then had this huge shock because, we didn't realize you couldn't do XYZ or you needed, this kind of license or whatever. And actually, for the majority of the companies that I talked to, they actually brought compliance, like a chief compliance officer, or, if they didn't have the staff, maybe they brought someone in from the outside to serve as a really strong advisor and guiding consultant to make sure like compliance was in their initial thinking. And what you see when you do that is it's not that thing you do at the end of your process to make sure that the regulator or the DOI lets you sell in that state. It becomes a way for you to enable flexibility and new ideas and to not have those roadblocks that, frankly, if an incumbent hits a compliance roadblock, generally they survive, right? Like it's a slowdown in releasing their product or filing their new rate or getting it approved, but it's not usually an existential threat for the company. For a startup who's looking at how much runway they have left, if you suddenly are like, oh gosh, it's going to be 6 more months till we can go live, you may stop existing, right? Or you may have to stop everything and go out and do another round of fundraising just to survive. So I think that might have been part of it is they realized like, if we're going to make it, we can't fight against the things that are just table stakes in insurance. We have to embrace it. And I saw company after company use that to create more flexibility and responsiveness and nimbleness and really bring some more understanding of this complex world of insurance into their core from the earliest of days. And that was not what I expected.
And that was one of the things that was a little surprising to me, because from conversations that I've had about, at least surface level, and it has been with incumbents, of like, what are those challenges or kind of detriments to the InsurTech industry? And it's always, well, they're coming in from the outside. They don't know how we do things and assessing risk and compliance. And
Yeah.
but it sounds like they've recognized that as a weakness and counteracted that, which is very interesting.
Yeah.
To flip that question then, so we're looking at surprising strengths. What was one of the maybe surprising, I don't want to say weaknesses, but challenges that these
Right.
companies were up against that you weren't expecting?
Well, so I'm not sure I would call it a weakness. I think that's fair, but definitely a challenge. And this is not, again, not something I expected, is on the culture side. And it's not to say that they were like their culture was a mess or they struggled with it, but I think when we picture a startup, we all have that image in our head of like it's a big open space and people are all like wearing flannels or Hawaiian shirt. Like I worked at a startup. I have 2 Hawaiian shirts. I don't think I would have those otherwise. But we have this like this kumbaya, like really open, easy way of working together and collaborating kind of mentality. And, in a lot of senses, that is true. But you go into these startups and it's really interesting. One of the companies, ClearCover, the co-founder, Kyle Nakatsuji, he said, we're both a high tech company or tech company and an insurance company. And those are two wildly different like talent pools that you're recruiting for and management styles and all that. But you need to be able to bring that together cohesively or you fail. You can't just be a tech company or just an insurance company and expect to succeed as a startup or frankly as most modern companies in any space, but especially with what's going on in InsurTech. So that was one where I think I sort of just expected like culture was, well, that's easy. They're startup, like everyone loves the culture at startups. It's all good. But actually, it was something they were all very deliberate about. And what I think was really interesting is you also think startups, like everyone has all these SaaS-based tools. They can work remotely. Like the pandemic, the lockdowns probably didn't really affect them. And yeah, they had the tools in place to, in an instant, everyone can work remotely. But what about the culture side? And like so much happens from these chance encounters and suddenly huddling or, just walking up to someone and saying like, hey, I had this idea for something. Can you show me that thing you're working on? I want to see if like just these very casual ways that really amazing things get discovered and worked through. And you lose that. You lose the casualness. You can still do it, but you have to be deliberate, right? You have to set the time to hop on a Zoom or a Google Meet or whatever and actually talk through it. And also by the same token supporting each other, so like you get to know each other and each other's lives and you ask about what's going on personally and or how things are going, and that can be a really casual way to help build the cohesiveness and the support. And again, you have to do that much more intentionally, and that's maybe a little bit awkward, like, hey, let's set a 15-minute Zoom to just hear how your spouse's health is doing. Like you can do that, but it's a little bit different, right? And so these are some of the things that I think startups have in spades, but then you take apart the ability to be together, even though they have the tools. maybe that challenges some of that nice kind of like camaraderie building that naturally can come for startups. There's much more deliberate focus on how do we build and maintain a culture, especially given that we've got two wildly different backgrounds of people coming together.
Number one, I'm going to request the next time that we collaborate that one of those Hawaiian shirts comes out of the closet.
I almost wore it and I was like, yeah, this may not be. And yeah, I've got a black one and a white one. So maybe there's like a happier theme and a
There
darker
we go.
theme. Yeah.
But I think that especially that point of deliberate connection,
Yeah.
that's something that even, Navient, same thing. We had all the tools in place. Culture is one of the biggest things of why I work with my coworkers and I'm at the company. And suddenly having that dispersed, it's not that they've done a wonderful job of trying to keep that as cohesive as possible, but just missing those conversations of, how is your child doing? All of a sudden you talk to someone and it's been 6 months and their kid is twice the size and you don't know anything that's going on in their life. And I could see how that would be really difficult, especially when you've got these two worlds colliding and these differences already that are kind of grooving against one another. It certainly presents a different challenge. And it's easy in everyone's mind to be like, oh, startups, that's like,
Right.
slide, that's their thing. They've got that. But it is a dynamic that everybody has to be intentional about.
Yeah. And they're hiring significant amounts of people, like as a percentage of the total company. Like I mentioned, ClearCover, they hired, I think it was 130 people in the pandemic that they'd never met. And like that's just different. And like 130 people to a 10,000 person company or more may not sound like a lot, but if you're like a 60 person or 200 person company, think about that. If half of your peers have never been around each other, it's not to say we can't do it, but you need to be really deliberate about that. You need to be mailing out, Hawaiian shirts to everybody and Nerf guns and all the other fun startup stuff, but it's more about the feeling we have for each other. And that's just different.
Well, thank you so much for sharing some of these insights. And again, I want to encourage everybody to go check out the book. It's going to be releasing in June, and we will include the pre-order link in the post that goes along with this video. But if you're not already following Bryan, make sure you make your way over to his LinkedIn and do that as well. And then reach out to either one of us if you've got any questions, and we'll help direct you and get you answers.
Thanks so much, Emma.
For joining me, Bryan.
If you're looking for expert tips on how to get started with your transformation or looking to hone in on your approach, make sure that you subscribe to our channel to catch our weekly Digital Transformation Talk series, where we interview experts from around the world on how to make it happen.